So it looks like the GPU market is finally responding to the amount of demand that's out there. And the best place to see this happen is when we have one of these like Amazon sales or any type of sales, Black Friday, things of that nature. The biggest item that I've seen with a pretty big discount is the RTX 4080. Now, this has an MSRP of $1199. This particular model, I believe, was $1299. It's going for $989. That's a fairly significant discount. I know a lot of you in the past have told me if the 4080 is under $1,000, that's the only time you'll start to consider it. Now, to be fair, this was a few months ago. A lot of things have changed. Is the 4080 still a good buy under $1,000? Clearly, at its MSRP, it's been one of the most unpopular GPUs. It seems like from what I've seen and what I've read online, people either go for the 4070 Ti, which can be had for under $800, or they just skip that line entirely and just go big for the 4090, which still, as of today, even with these sales, it's pretty close to its MSRP. And now let's hear a word from our sponsor, VIP-CDKdeals.com, a Windows 10 Pro CD key. Add to cart, you put in code CC20. This will also work on Windows 11. You want to go into your settings in Windows, change and adjust your CD key, click activate, and now let's go back to the video. Now you can find them, so that's certainly a positive point. Remember, early on when the 4090 came out, they were kind of like perpetually sold out, much like the great GPU shortage a few years ago for every GPU. So the 4090 certainly is going to be a little bit unique in that regard, but unfortunately, those aren't getting that many discounts. I still see them for like $16.99. Occasionally, you can find one for $15.99, which is like the MSRP, but even those are getting pretty difficult to find. But the 4080, pretty abundantly available. Obviously, there are 4080 models like the Strix and different GPUs like that get pretty close to the price of a 4090. Those are certainly going to be a hard sell. We're looking at this particular one here, which is a Zotac model. Maybe not as cool as a Strix, but basically it's a 4080 still, and you save a huge amount of money. At $989, let's see some of the benefits you're getting on the 4080 compared to maybe what's around it. Remember, AMD is going to respond with the 7900 XTX, which that one, especially with these sales, also seems to be around $100 cheaper than the 4080, which isn't the biggest price difference as we're used to seeing. Usually if a 4080 is $1,200, obviously you would expect something like a 7900 XTX to be $999 or less, so at least a $200 difference. But since these GPUs are getting cheaper and the 4080 isn't really like used to being under $1,000, this is going to be a little bit of an exception. So you do get 16 gigabytes of VRAM. The memory width bus is fine. This is a GPU that can do 4K. It's not really going to be problematic. Like maybe the 4070 Ti is where you start to have some more issues with the VRAM only being 12 gigabytes. So 16 gigabytes of VRAM, pretty much the sweet spot, I would say. Obviously, you do want 20 or 24. In fact, the 4080 Ti, which is rumored to come out possibly at 20 gigabytes of VRAM, would round that out a little bit better for some better future proofing. But in the meantime, 16 gigabytes of VRAM is more than enough. Remember, developers have to contend with gamers still having only 8 gigabytes of VRAM. So even if you're playing at 4K, typically it's going to be fine for now. And while the 4080 isn't on the same level as a 4090, for the most part, let's say 1440p absolutely dominates 1440p, basically any game. And even at 4K, it does really, really well. Obviously, if you're playing some games with like, ray tracing and things like that, that's where you may need like Cyberpunk. If you want to do like overdrive, you still will need a 4090 to get the best performance. But in most games, even with ray tracing, something that's not extreme, you're going to be doing pretty well with a 4080. So around that price certainly makes some sense. And that brings it a lot closer to the 4070 Ti. It's no longer, like a $400 difference, but then maybe you're talking about like a $200 difference between this 4080 and some models of the 4070 Ti. That makes you think a little bit more because then it's a little bit more future proofing. I guess one of the questions here is, what's the appetite for GPUs around $1,000? All right, so the 4080 is under $1,000 now, especially with this sale. What does that mean? Does that mean people still want to buy it? Maybe not. Maybe people are either satiated already with like 4070 and below price points, like under $599, or they just go for the 4090, leaving this like a no man's land of GPUs. There's a chance that's happening. I mean, I'm sure there are people that have been waiting for the 4080 to get cheaper, under $1,000, so this will likely be a good buy. And I think something else that it does, it kind of removes a little bit of the doubt that gamers have when you're buying a 4080. Let's be honest, you buy that 4080, you're going to have two questions. First, should I upgrade to the 4090? Should you spend those extra few bucks and upgrade? In this case, that question's easier to answer because there's a much bigger price gap. If you're talking about 1200 versus 1600, it's a little bit closer. But now you're talking about the 4090s. Most of them are 16 or 1700 compared to 989. That's a pretty big price difference, and I think that will make a lot more people comfortable buying the 4080. That's the first question. The second question is, how about the AMD 7900 XTX? Obviously, when the 4080 is around $1,100 or $1,200 and you have the XTX around $900, that makes you question it, because remember, the XTX, even though it doesn't have the ray tracing performance of a 4080, it doesn't have, the NVIDIA DLSS 3, it doesn't have a lot of little NVIDIA specific niceties, it still performs really well and pretty much on average can beat a 4080 in rasterization. That's why that question is there. But now that the price comes down closer to only $100 difference, because NVIDIA has a bigger mind share and market share, I think a lot of gamers are probably, they're willing to spend $100 extra to get NVIDIA. Remember, NVIDIA still has the best drivers. Intel and AMD are going to be, behind NVIDIA. Obviously, AMD's closer. They've done a lot better this generation, but overall, it seems like NVIDIA just has a lot more going on in the driver department, so that means they update it more frequently. There are things that just seem to perform a little bit smoother with less little drawbacks. So having said that, that ends up showing the 4080 as a potential buy. Like, it's still not an amazing buy because it's still a $1,000 GPU. So if that budget is not something realistic for you, it doesn't even matter, right? But certainly it's a lot better than it's been before, and it's going in the right direction. Remember yesterday when we talked about the 4080 Ti coming in at $1,199? Maybe they're starting to test a price point under $1,000 to see how a 4080 would be at $989 or $999. Obviously, I think it would certainly sell more than it does now, and if they dropped it all the way down to like $899, that would start to be pretty interesting. That may then be a pretty killer GPU for $899. Obviously, you're still going to have the competition around it, AMD releasing different GPUs, and then obviously the 7900 XTX would probably be $100 cheaper than that. But I'm a little skeptical in how low they're willing to go, just because they're riding the entire AI train, so they can kind of hold on to higher pricing for the most part. But I think they know the 4080 is one of the first GPUs that needs a discount, and this is a pretty good indication of that it's happening already. All right, guys, let me know what you think down below. Remember to subscribe, and I'll see you guys on the next video.